Story 1. The Phantom on Route 191. They say Route 191 in Arizona is cursed. Truckers call it the Devil's Highway, and some refuse to drive it at night. Too many accidents, too many disappearances, and too many stories that sound impossible to explain. Cole, a long-haul driver with 15 years of experience, didn't believe in curses, at least not until that night. He had left the depot in Clifton just after sundown, hauling a half-empty trailer toward Utah. His schedule pushed him through the mountains in the dead of night. The air was thin, dry, and cold. The CB radio was silent, and the road stretched on endlessly between desert cliffs and dark forests. Cole liked the solitude most nights, but something about that drive gnawed at him. The headlights seemed weaker than usual, swallowed by the dark. The road felt heavier, as if it were pressing down on the truck itself. Every mile, he found himself glancing at the mirrors, not sure why. Hours later, as the road curved into a lonely stretch of asphalt lined with saguaros and jagged rocks, he saw her. At first, just a shape on the shoulder, blurred by distance. He eased his foot on the gas, squinting through the windshield. The figure was unmistakable now, a woman standing perfectly still, as though she had been waiting just for him. She wore a long white dress that fluttered slightly in the wind, the kind of fabric that belonged to another century. Her hair hung straight, black as the night sky. Cole slowed down. His first thought was accident. Maybe her car had broken down. Maybe she needed help. But then, the air inside his cab shifted. The heater was on, but suddenly his breath turned white, clouding the glass. A chill crept through his bones, the kind of cold that feels unnatural in the desert. The woman raised her head slowly, and Cole's stomach dropped. Her face was pale, almost glowing, but it was her eyes that froze him. They weren't human. Black hollows, deep pits that seemed to swallow the headlight's beam. For a moment, he felt as though those eyes weren't just looking at him, they were inside his head, pulling at something he couldn't resist. His instinct screamed. Cole jerked the wheel, leaning hard on the horn. The sound thundered across the empty highway, echoing against the canyon walls. He braced himself for impact as the truck barreled past, but there was nothing. No thud, no scream, no shadow cast in the mirror. The shoulder of the road was empty. The woman was gone. Cole's hand shook as he tried to steady the rig. His heart pounded so violently he thought it might break his ribs. He forced himself to check the mirrors again and again, but she wasn't there. All that remained was the dead silence of the CB radio and the hiss of the tires against the pavement. Later, at a rest stop outside St. John's, Cole mentioned the encounter to another driver refueling nearby. He expected laughter, or maybe pity. Instead, the man's face went pale. "You saw her, didn't you?" the driver whispered. "The woman in white." According to local lore, she has haunted Route 191 for decades. Some say she was the victim of a car crash, left to die on the roadside. Others insist she was murdered, buried somewhere in the desert, but no matter the version, the warnings are always the same. If your CB radio cuts out, and the night grows colder than it should, don't stop for anyone. Cole hasn't driven Route 191 at night since that encounter. He'll take the long way around, even if it costs him hours, because the woman in white is still out there, waiting. And every trucker who's seen her tells the same story. Those hollow eyes are impossible to forget. Story 2. The Hitchhiker on Highway 50. There's a stretch of road through Nevada they call the loneliest highway in America. It's Highway 50, a two-lane strip of asphalt that cuts through hundreds of miles of desert and silence. Most nights, you can drive for hours without seeing another pair of headlights, and that's what makes the stories about the hitchhiker so terrifying. Jake was heading east, hauling parts to Denver. It was close to midnight, and the desert was black, no lights, no stars, no signal on his phone. He had the CB tuned to channel 19, but not a single voice came through, just static. Then, up ahead, something moved. At first, he thought it was an animal, a coyote or maybe a deer. But as he got closer, he saw the shape of a person standing on the side of the road. A man, wearing an old denim jacket, his thumb out like he'd been waiting there all night. Jake wasn't the kind of guy to stop for hitchhikers, especially not in the middle of nowhere. But something about this man felt different. Not dangerous, just lost. So he slowed down, flicked on his hazard lights, and pulled over. The man climbed in without saying a word. He looked young, maybe in his 20s, and pale like he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. His clothes were clean, but outdated, like something from the 1980s. "Where you headed?" Jake asked. The hitchhiker turned, gave a faint smile, and said softly, "Just up the road." They rode in silence for a few miles. Jake kept glancing at the passenger. The man sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. No phone, no bag, just his hands folded in his lap. The radio crackled faintly, and Jake tried to shake off the unease building in his gut. When they reached a faded sign that read, "Eerie, 30 miles more," the hitchhiker suddenly spoke. "This is where I get out." Jake looked around. There was nothing. No exit, no building, no lights, just desert. "You sure?" Jake asked. The hitchhiker nodded slowly. "I've been trying to get home for a long time." Jake pulled to the shoulder. The man opened the door and stepped out into the darkness. The dome light flickered once, then went out completely. Jake muttered under his breath and turned the ignition off, trying to reset it. When the light came back, the road outside was empty. The hitchhiker was gone. Confused, Jake jumped out, scanning the desert with a flashlight. No footprints, no dust kicked up, nothing but silence and wind. He got back in the truck, heart racing, and put it in gear. The CB sputtered to life for the first time in hours, but instead of voices, he heard something else. A faint whisper through the static. It was a man's voice. "Thanks for the ride." Jake slammed the volume knob off. The voice stopped, but the chill stayed in the cab all the way to Denver. Weeks later, at a diner off I-70, he overheard two other truckers talking about Highway 50. They mentioned a young man who died out there decades ago, trying to walk home after his car broke down. They say he still thumbs for rides on lonely nights, and if you stop, he'll sit quiet until he's near the spot where he died. Then he disappears. Jake didn't join their conversation. He just paid his bill, stepped outside, and glanced toward the highway. Because in the distance, for just a second, he swore he saw a figure in denim, standing by the road with his thumb out, waiting for another driver to stop. Story 3. The Light's Over. Highway 375. Highway 375 in Nevada has another name, the Extraterrestrial Highway. Locals say strange things happen there at night. Lights that move too fast for aircraft, shapes that hover silently over the desert, and sounds that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Truckers who drive that route know better than to stop after dark. Mason didn't believe any of it. He'd been trucking for 15 years, and the only strange lights he'd ever seen were from drunks swerving with their high beams on. He was running late that night, hauling refrigeration units to Reno, cutting through the desert with just the moon to light his way. Around 1 a.m., he noticed something in the distance, a faint blue glow on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a town, maybe gas station lights, but his GPS showed nothing for the next 40 miles. The glow wasn't steady either. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The radio began to hiss softly, then louder. Mason tapped the dash, thinking the connection was loose, but the sound turned into a static-filled hum, like a low mechanical growl. The glow got brighter. Within minutes, the entire sky ahead of him shimmered with pale blue light. It didn't illuminate like a normal headlight or flare. It painted everything in a cold, almost metallic tone. The asphalt gleamed, the desert rock shone, and Mason could see his own breath fogging in front of him, even though the heater was blasting. He slowed the rig, squinting upward. That's when he saw it. Hovering low above the highway was a formation of lights, 5 of them, arranged in a perfect V shape. No sound, no rotor blades, no jet engine, just silence and that eerie humming filling the cab. They weren't blinking, just glowing, steady and smooth, moving slowly along the road in front of him. For a moment, he thought it had to be some kind of military aircraft. This was Nevada, after all. But the longer he watched, the less it made sense. The lights tilted, rotated in complete unison, and then they stopped, dead still. Mason's rig came to a crawl. The CB spat out a single burst of static, then silence. The truck lights flickered, the engine sputtered, and the dashboard went black. Everything died, engine, lights, even his phone. The world went completely still. He sat there in the dark, gripping the wheel, heart pounding. The desert was silent except for the hum, and then one of the lights broke away from the formation and began drifting toward him. It wasn't fast. It floated, slow, deliberate, until it hung above the hood of his truck. The cab filled with blinding light. Mason tried to move, but couldn't. His arms felt heavy, his body frozen in place. He couldn't tell if seconds or minutes passed. Then the light vanished, just gone. The dashboard blinked back to life. The radio came alive with static again, and the engine coughed and roared. The formation of lights shot upward into the night sky and disappeared into the stars. Mason sat there for a long time before driving again. When he finally reached the next rest stop, dawn was breaking. The clock on his dashboard read 5:27 a.m., but his GPS tracker said he had arrived 2 hours earlier. He checked his watch. It read 3:27. 2 hours gone. Later, when he called dispatch, the operator told him his rig had vanished from the tracking map for exactly that amount of time. No signal, no trace, nothing. Mason doesn't talk about it much now. He still drives, but he refuses to take Highway 375 after dark. He says the hum never really leaves your ears. It stays there, quiet, waiting. And sometimes, when he's parked under the open sky at night, he still catches a faint pulse of blue light reflecting off the chrome of his truck, as if something out there remembers him, too. Story 4. The Rest. Stop Caller. It was a rainy night on Interstate 40, somewhere between Oklahoma City and Amarillo. The kind of rain that doesn't fall, it slashes. Windshield wipers struggled to keep up, and the storm blurred the world into streaks of gray and white. Rick, a trucker from Texas, had been on the road for 16 hours straight. He was exhausted but close to the halfway mark, and his next stop was a rest area he'd used before. Small, quiet, just a couple of vending machines and an old payphone that hadn't worked in years. He pulled in around 2 a.m. The lot was empty except for a single blue pickup parked crooked near the bathrooms. The rain hammered the roof of the cab while the engine cooled. Rick turned off the ignition and leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He was just about to drift off when the payphone outside started ringing. One sharp ring, then another, then another. Rick sat up straight. That phone hadn't worked the last 3 times he'd stopped there. He was sure of it. He stared through the rain-streaked windshield as the ringing continued, steady and mechanical. On the 5th ring, it stopped. Rick told himself it was probably just the storm messing with old wires. But then, 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time, curiosity won. He grabbed his jacket, stepped out into the storm, and made his way across the slick concrete. The rain was cold, biting through his clothes. The payphone sat under a flickering yellow light, the metal surface streaked with rust and graffiti. It rang one more time as he reached for it. Rick hesitated, then picked up the receiver. "Hello?" At first, all he heard was static. Faint, whispering static, like someone breathing close to the mic. Then, a voice. Low, male, calm. "You shouldn't be here, Rick." His blood ran cold. He pulled the phone away and stared at it. Nobody knew he'd stopped. He hadn't called dispatch, hadn't told a soul where he was. He pressed the receiver back to his ear. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled softly. "You already know." The light above him flickered twice. The static grew louder, almost like wind howling through a tunnel. Rick's heartbeat thundered in his ears. "What do you want?" The voice whispered. "Turn around!" He froze. The world seemed to stop. The rain, the sound, even his breathing. Slowly, he turned. The blue pickup he'd seen earlier now had its headlights on, but there was no one inside. The engine wasn't running, but the radio was. Faint music drifting through the storm. Rick dropped the receiver, backing toward his truck. The payphone continued to hum with static behind him. When he climbed back into the cab, he slammed the locks down and started the engine. But as soon as he turned the key, the CB radio crackled to life. It was the same voice. "You shouldn't have answered." Rick threw the truck into gear, spinning tires as he tore out of the lot. He didn't stop until he reached the next town an hour away. When he looked back in the mirror, the rain had stopped, but he could still hear the faint click of a phone line disconnecting. Weeks later, he drove that route again in daylight. Out of morbid curiosity, he pulled into the same rest area. The pavement was cracked, weeds pushing through. The payphone was gone. Just an empty pole with frayed wires hanging from it. Rick never talked about that night again. But some truckers say if you pull into that same rest stop during a storm, you can still hear the phone ringing through the rain, waiting for someone else to answer.